that probably everybody's experienced, and probably we don't tend to, well, we do talk about it,
Yeah.
and we probably talk about it too much in normal life, but it's not something people would tend to do a podcast about, and that is bad preaching. What do you do when you are sitting, listening, and somebody's preaching, and it just isn't good? How do you respond to that?
Well, think a bit about, I guess, how we tend to respond badly to that, and that can be kind of a problem.
We should probably define what that is as well.
Yeah, we'll define what kind of bad preaching is. The thing that first came to mind, though, I think, in some kind of more recent experiences of mine hearing preaching, that I was thinking, this isn't great, or this is not good in some way. But I was really challenged by just the thought of, well, maybe I'm listening to bad preaching and the problem is me. Like, I'm bringing issues, and my responses to this preaching is a problem. So perhaps I'm responding or feeling that this preaching is bad because I'm actually spiritually cold. Maybe it's because I want or am expecting the preacher to sort of say certain things, or sort of, do certain theological tick list things. I'm like, well, it can only be good preaching if this is said, or if this is done, or if it's done like this, and it's not done like that, or it's not said like that, therefore it's bad preaching. And I'm sort of in a bit of a huff because this is bad preaching because he hasn't done the thing that I want him to do in my head. Actually, that's my problem.
Yeah,
that's not their problem. That's my issue. And so I think just when we're thinking, like you say, we'll define what we're thinking in terms of bad preaching and how we should respond properly. But one of the responses is to check my own heart. Okay, Lord, is this an issue with me?
Yeah, and that's actually biblical. When you think about Mark 4 and the parable of the soils, it was the same sower, it was the same seed. The difference was the soils. It was the state of the heart in which the seed landed. And I think that's a good place to start, because the reality is I can be sat there listening with a hard heart. Yeah. And the problem may well be me. Yeah. And I would much rather face that and have God work on my heart than just sit there in sort of a grumpy state of judgment. Yeah,
exactly. And, we're talking really about sort of evaluating preaching, and we'll talk about like how to evaluate it, both when you're the one preaching and when you're the one listening. But in all of it, we want to be saying, let's evaluate, because that's important, but evaluate with humility.
Yeah.
And we're not evaluating from a place of above, and I'm better, and I know more, and I could do a better job. We're trying to evaluate from a place of love and humility, and that's a really important place to start.
Because actually, whoever I am, even if I am a esteemed preacher or a teacher of preaching, or hold some professorship, or some lofty pulpit somewhere, the reality is, if I've sat down to listen to a sermon, I need to be preached to.
Yeah.
I need to receive from the word. Yeah. And so it's never a situation of mere evaluation. There's also always a sense of, but I need this. Ideally, I need this to be good. I need this to register and to land and to work in me, because none of us are above sitting under Scripture.
So with all that being said, and important place to start, what are the areas that you're thinking? And so when you're listening to preaching, what are the kind of the areas that you're thinking about, okay, this needs to sort of hit certain things?
Well, there's things that have to be part of preaching for it to be true biblical preaching.
Okay.
So, for example, in whatever definition of preaching you find in the textbooks or in various courses and so on, there's always something about God being involved. There's always something about the meaning of the text being accurately communicated. There's always something about the person doing the communicating, and there's always something about the relevance being clarified for listeners. Yeah. And so even at the sort of foundational level of definition, if somebody's preaching and the Bible is not the authority of what they're saying, the Bible's being kind of bypassed, there's a problem. That's bad preaching. It's not even really preaching.
Yeah.
But equally, it could be thoroughly biblical, And it could be compellingly communicated, and it could have been thoroughly prayed through, but if it doesn't land, there's no sense of relevance, then I would still say that's not really true biblical preaching. Just a historic lecture doesn't qualify as true preaching. And so any one of those elements missing, there's going to be a problem. But in terms of evaluating, the evaluation that I use for others is what I look for in myself. And that is, again, four things. Is this biblical? Right? Is the Bible being handled well, communicated effectively? Well, that's a separate element, I suppose. But is the text driving the message? Is the text meaning coming through?
Yeah, that's more than just, is the Bible open? Because the Bible can be open,
Yeah.
but not used, not referred to. They can have the Bible reading and
Say goodbye
kind
to
of
it.
go off. Yeah, and
Yeah.
well, it's biblical because they started with the Bible. It's like, well, it's more than just,
Yeah.
is the Bible open?
Like John Stott said in his book, Between Two Worlds, expository preaching is where the Bible is boss.
Right.
So is the Bible the boss of this message?
Yeah.
In a way that actually reflects what the Bible's saying, not just being misused and people abused by the Bible. So number one, biblical. Is it biblical? Secondly, is it clear? Can I follow what's being said? Does it make sense? Is there a sort of a logical flow of thought? Can I tell where they are in the text? Can I understand the words that are being spoken? If there isn't clarity, there isn't communication.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for it to be biblical. Number one, I'm looking for it to be clear. I'm looking for it to be relevant, like we just said. It's got to speak into the realities of my life. It can't sound like something out of the 1500s or the 1800s or the first century. It needs to be 21st century, this context, these people. Is it relevant to us, both in content and in style? I think that's important. And then the fourth one that sometimes is missing is to not only be biblical and clear and relevant, but also to be engaging. And that's where I want to listen.
Yeah.
There's some sort of combination of energy, of relevance, of pacing. There's something about it. There's a sense in which I'm drawn in or I'm put to sleep. The opposite of engaging is dull,
Right.
boring preaching.
Right.
And I'm not a fan.
No, and what I really find those four things, that kind of quadrant, helpful for lots of reasons. But I think sometimes when I listen to preaching and I feel that uneasiness before I know exactly why. It's that kind of thing of where there's something not.
Yeah.
And then by having that kind of quadrant, okay, is this something not? Is that a biblical thing? Like, well, no, they do seem to be, but is it more of a landing thing? Yeah, I think it is. Is it that relevance? We're in a group of this type of person, and they're preaching to a completely different type of person. Okay, so that's a kind of a relevance thing, and sometimes I will go through that quadrant and think, okay, what is it?
Yeah.
Or just a very brief positive spin is that if I'm really engaged and enjoying the preaching, it's what is it about this preaching that I'm enjoying? Is it, this is thoroughly biblical, I'm loving this. Oh, it's really landing in my heart. Praise the Lord. Okay, go. And then I'm sort of dropping the quadrant and think about it later on,
Yeah.
So it kind of is helpful in both situations.
But I think, yeah, it is. And I think it's not that we want to sit with a quadrant in our minds with evaluation being the primary thing. The primary thing is, here's my heart, please feed it. Point me to Jesus.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a bit naive to think that you don't evaluate. Mm-hmm. At some point, if something's especially good or especially bad, there will be some sense of why, what's going on, what's missing, or what's being done well. And so, I think it's perfectly legitimate to do that. And we'll get to this, but if you are responsible for the fact that this person is preaching, whether it's you're the organizer of a conference or you're the leader of a church who's invited this guest speaker, any sort of responsibility requires you to evaluate. You are responsible for this and for the future and for the people listening. And so there are definitely places where evaluation can come into it. So
how should we, or how is a bad way to, to respond to bad preaching. So, we've this kind of evaluating quadrant is helpful for the sort of the why, but then I think one of the things is really easy. Perhaps it's more easy in a conference kind of place. Is you hear a bad message or kind of a bad preaching experience, and you just moan to as many people as possible, because there's a sense that kind of makes you. Well, for me, sometimes my moaning comes from a place of, well, I'm moaning because I know what I'm talking about, and it sort of makes me cleverer. You really like that? That's very simple. Actually, it was really bad for these 10 reasons. So let me, kind of be above you. But actually, that moaning certainly in the church would be an issue too. But in that kind of conference, they're just going around moaning about being complaining. Oh, wasn't that rubbish?
Doesn't help anyone.
It doesn't help anyone.
And it also, it's quite humbling. Over time, you'll have occasions where you hear somebody preach and you think, that was awful. That was really bad. And then you hear somebody else and it's changed their life.
Right. Yeah.
And then you go, oh
yeah. Sorry.
Okay, I'll be humble then, because obviously my evaluation isn't perfect. Or maybe my evaluation is spot on, but actually God uses bad preaching.
Right.
And we should all be thankful for that, because we're all capable of it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's certainly an element that some people have even got saved in response to a message that was bordering on heretical. Yeah. And you go, wow, Lord, look what you've done.
Even that.
However, that we don't want to just bury our heads in the sand and, trust that somewhere in this vast auditorium somebody's getting saved. We hope so. But what can we do in response to it? And so I think in terms of, putting myself right there in that situation, I'm sat in the seat, the person's preaching, and I'm struggling. Check my own heart, like you said. Is there something up with me? Pray about that. Then I don't want to tear down. I don't want to be a negative force. I want to be helpful. So what can I do? Well, I can pray.
Yeah.
Maybe the person's just having a bad day. Maybe they've just had bad news and they're distracted. Maybe something's going on and there's a reason why the preaching is not what you're expecting. Pray for them. That seems entirely appropriate. Then what can you do? You can learn from it. If you're a preacher, like we preach, and so if we're in a conference and we're listening to something that's really good, we want it to land and work in us, but along the way we're also going to say, oh, I liked how they did that.
Yeah.
I can learn from that.
Yeah.
But equally, this isn't working. Why?
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot from some very bad sermons over the years. And so there's the sort of the learning element. And sometimes, honestly, I've found that I'm struggling so much. This isn't common. Please don't try to find the preacher that I'm referring to. But there are times where I've said, okay, I just can't cope. This is really bothering me. I'm just going to focus on the passage. I'm just going to read through this passage and kind of let the passage do its work, despite the fact that this person is up there talking badly. And so, that's kind of, in my mind, worst case, how to handle the sermon from the pew when it's really bad. At the very worst, you can still look at the text and be ministered to by the text, because God's Spirit is working in you. The text is still inspired. You're not dependent on the preacher.
Because if the Bible is boss that's like a truth. But if the Bible isn't boss in the preaching kind of moment, it can still be boss in your heart as you're kind of reading it. And either you're reading the passage that the person's supposed to be preaching on, or if even it's so bad there isn't even a passage particularly, you can find one and
pick one.
But you kind of have a moment kind of with the Lord and say, okay, Lord, okay, this is me and you. And that can be really, really beneficial. So that's kind of in the moment of it. But then obviously there's the sort of post moments and
interaction
Yeah,
with others, but also with the preacher.
Yeah, so that's exactly what kind of thing, particularly if it's in your sort of more local area, if it's your church or a church that you're in. So you're going to be engaging with the people around you. Just
thinking, even at a conference, you could still interact with the preacher.
Yeah, it happens.
And what do you do at that point? I think we need to be careful not to give disingenuous feedback. You know, because it's very tempting when everybody around you is shaking the person's hand and saying, "Thank you, that was wonderful," and you're thinking, "Oh, that was bordering on heresy," or "That was dull," or whatever the issue was. what can you genuinely say? You know, if you need to interact with the preacher just as sort of a handshake, find something you can say that's encouraging because it's building up rather than tearing down. If you can have a conversation, then you can start to ask questions and say, help me understand, you know, why did you say that? Or I didn't quite catch this point that you were making. And it may be that as they then talk about it, the conversation can get somewhere. You know, so this typically doesn't happen. You know, in conferences, you don't tend to end up chatting with the preacher, but you might. And if you do, you don't want to just rip into him, but neither do you want to pander and sort of pretend all is wonderful and just feed an ego that perhaps is going to feed off the positive comments and keep doing the same thing.
And that is actually true too in your church, because you know you hear of people that just sort of bound up to the preacher after the church service and just lock their fists and just go, well, that was terrible for these reasons, or that was rubbish, or and like, you know, don't do that. I
think you need to have a bit of mercy with somebody who's just preached. Because right after they've preached, they're probably feeling pretty fragile. They've just given something of themselves. And so if you have a deep, genuine conversation that you need to have, it might be better to have it later in the week or at another time, if that's an open opportunity, which is more likely in your own church than it is at a conference. But also, I think just bearing with. You know, I don't want people in my church nitpicking every detail of my life. I want them to bear with me to a certain extent. But if there is an issue, I also want them to come and tell me.
Don't sort of go for a fight, but equally don't just ignore it. If there has been an issue, particularly, I think, if there's sort of a theological or kind of potential heresy issue, that's something that you need to address with the preacher. But it's coming at it, like you said, from a place of kind of bearing with, and maybe they meant what they said that is potentially heretical in your view, or maybe they just missed a word out. There was, you know, more misspoke or kind of whatever, you know, the phrases is, and they've sort of, in that moment, it's a bit flustery and they've said something, and then you go, oh, did you mean to say that? Oh, no, not at all, sorry.
Right.
But then if they did mean it, then the conversation kind of becomes different.
That's right. And if we're sort of functioning as theological vigilantes, you know, we can find something and go after it brutally. And sometimes always that's not helpful. Sometimes that's unfair. I mean, I'm thinking of an example where someone I respect very highly, who has fed me with the word, and, you know, I'm really appreciative of their life and ministry, seemed to kind of have a funny couple of minutes and honestly kind of preached a heresy. And I was like, whoa, hang on a minute. That's really bad. But I didn't overreact, just had a gentle conversation later, and they went, oh yeah, no, you're right. And they totally got it. And they weren't being deliberately heretical. It was just one of those moments. And so, bearing with, gentle, gracious interaction can achieve a lot. But what do you do if you're in a church and you're listening to preaching week after week after week and you're struggling with it?
You know, if a preacher is in your church is like occasionally boring, or occasionally unclear, or every so often, you know, not relevant to you, particularly on that Sunday, that's still hard. That it's even if the, you know, I have been in other churches, and it's been, you know, it's not been, you know, superb every single week, and it's hard when the preaching is not good every week, because that's how kind of really key way that we're fed and that we grow. But where there's a consistent issue, or where there are consistent issues, that's when the conversation that's when there has to be a conversation.
Yes.
There has to be a conversation. It can't just be, and I think if someone, you know, if it gets to the level of even potentially we need to leave this church because it's doing harm, there still has to be a conversation. It can't just be we're done. There has to be a conversation, but that conversation has to be done like well and carefully.
That's right. And it's possible. Some people would say you should never leave a church. You know, there's too much consumerism, too much jumping around. And obviously in some places there is no option. I get that. But in a lot of places there are other churches around. Is it ever right to leave a church? I think, yeah. There are certainly lines that get crossed in leadership and in preaching consistently that you just actually, I can't do this.
Yeah.
This is not helping me spiritually. Also, I'm responsible for my family. You know, it's going to have an impact on my family if I stay here. So whether it's a sort of a moral / cultural issue, whether it's a heresy, you know, direct biblical theological thing, whatever it is, there are lines that you have to say, actually, I need to leave, but you can still leave well.
Yeah.
You still have the conversations that you need to have. You can still leave with warmth rather than sort of leaving a mess behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's trying to help and encourage growth, but yours and families, like you're saying, but even the church itself and the church leader, you know, maybe if, you know, I think it is a problem if you're in a church and the preaching is, like you say, is consistently boring and unengaging. It might seem a bit petty, but I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
To have a conversation with the preacher or the leaders and say, look, this is a problem.
I feel like there needs to be a sequence of conversations before the last conversation.
The big one. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so it's not just that the last one needs to be handled well. The interim ones need to be handled well, because if a preacher feels like you are their biggest critic and they sort of start dreading their inbox because every week you've got some nitpick, you know, little detail that you disagree with and you have to air it with them, they're not really going to be listening to you. And so having the conversations where they can sense that you are for them, that you are praying for them, that you care about the church, that you're invested, all of that adds up and sort of puts credit in the bank, if you like, so that when you say, actually, I'm kind of struggling with this, they might be open to hearing it.
I like that, particularly, again, I'll come back to the boring one again, but just because sometimes that can be reflective of the spiritual health at that time or in that season. And so, you know, if there's a preacher who's normally very engaging and then has a season of not engaging very well, okay, that could be, not always, but it could be reflective of their spiritual health at that point. That if they're not, you know, if you delight in the Lord, you will help other people to delight. You know, you'll be delightful as you preach. So that praying as you're sort of confronting or raising and asking questions is massive.
I think also you have some preachers don't preach better because they've never known better. They're doing what they've heard. They've doing what they were given growing up, what they've always experienced. The conferences they go to are all the same, whatever. And to gently introduce them to something can actually be helpful. Now, that's difficult because preachers, I think, struggle knowing that they're sort of competing against the best. Do you know what I mean? Like the podcast preachers who are very slick, very well edited, preach the same sermon 5 times, take the best one and then edit it and then put it online. And, you know, have a visual graphics team of 5 people working all week to prepare how this thing looks on stage and all of that. Of course we can't compete with these people. It's just a totally different league. It's like taking a top sportsman and saying you should play your amateur football the way this person plays football. It's impossible. But at the same time, there is a place for saying, I'm for you, I'm with you, I appreciate you feeding my family every week. Can I share with you this message that really encouraged me? And so it's not, here's an example you're supposed to live up to. It's I just heard this message and it really blessed my heart. Would it, you know, can I share it with you? And it's not a threat then. It's a genuine sharing. And it may be that the person who receives that also is blessed and encouraged and maybe has their categories opened a little bit for what's possible in preaching. Because honestly, I think some people are dull and don't realize that it's possible not to be.
And people don't realize that actually sort of preaching to the people in the, we did an episode recently about this, about landing, preaching, and sometimes preaching, you don't know that you can land to the specific people in the room because you've almost never seen it or never heard it kind of been done. But just being able to confront or challenge, but to encourage. Okay, like, I liked how you were trying to apply it to people like me.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to do that more, type thing, is a lot better than saying, "Oh, you just suck."
Yeah. Or even you don't do that enough.
Or don't do that ever. Yeah.
Or it's like find the positive and build it.
Yeah.
Share resources, share encouragement, be the biggest prayer warrior for your pastor.
Yeah.
But eventually you've got to take stock of things. And we talk about how training and equipping people for preaching ministry is so strategic. We think about in the European context when we're leading the Bible Teachers and Preachers Network at the European Leadership Forum. And our kind of language a lot is that if local churches could just be fed with decent preaching, not astonishing preaching, not amazing preaching, not the best preaching you've ever heard, just decently biblical, solid, clear, okay preaching, just basic, then that would lead to health.
Yeah.
In the same way as if my wife feeds my children not 5-star cuisine like you get in a restaurant or whatever, but just a steady diet of, proteins and vegetables and not too much sugar, just a basic diet, my children grow up to be healthy. And if a church would just have good, solid biblical preaching, doesn't have to be amazing preaching, doesn't have to be the best preaching, just a steady diet of the Bible explained, applied by somebody who loves Jesus, that's going to make a huge difference. And so in the same way, if a church is being fed a steady diet of junk, heretically off, biblically not accurate, not well handled, or presentationally dull, whatever the issue is, a steady diet of something that's not good is going to end up with bad health outcomes. The same way as if you eat junk food every single day, eventually your body will pay for it. Yeah. And so as a father, in my case, with my own family, I'm responsible for them, and I don't want them to suffer the long-term consequences of me just being diligent in sticking it out. And so it may be that there are times where you say, no, for the sake of my family, we need to move. That happens. When it happens, leave well, move well. It's possible.
One final quick thought just before we go to a short Bible passage that you'll take us through to sort of help us end the episode. But just a thought about kind of what happens when it's me doing the bad preaching. One of the things I think that we can really feel obviously is when my preaching is bad or less than good, isn't to bury my head in the sand. It is to trust God and say, okay, Lord, if I'm preaching the gospel, then, take that and water it and kind of grow in people. But I think even just the need, again, for conversation, just humbly, if you feel that your preaching is bad, ask for help and go to people in your church or that and other preachers and say, and just that humility is really powerful, and say, look, can you help me?
And the thing about that as well, just one quick comment, is you can't fix everything at once.
Right.
And so if you talk to 3 or 4 people, your spouse, a friend, another person who's involved in the ministry of the church, whoever, you speak to a group of people and you come up with a list, and, there's a lack of depth in biblical content, there's a clumsiness in the way you transition, there's lack of eye contact, you have a distracting habit, and there's just this huge list of issues. That's overwhelming, and you're never going to be able to fix all of that in the same next sermon. Yeah. And so you have to filter through that and say, okay, which ones are sort of low fruit? What can I take? I didn't realize that I was constantly poking my cheek or something, whatever the gesture is that's distracting. That might be quite easy to stop it. Okay, move on. Okay, what's the next thing I can do? Or it may be you say, no, I'm not going for the low-hanging fruit. I'm going for the biggest issue here. I'm not handling the scriptures well. I'm not clear on the gospel. I'm not pointing to Jesus. Whatever it is that that you go, ooh, that's huge. Maybe you need to get a mentor, read a book, get some help, have further conversation, but take something and improve it. And it's the same with delivery and communication stuff. You can't improve eye contact and voice and pitch and pace and pause and gesturing all at the same time. Pick one, work on it, improve it. Pick the next one, work on it, improve it. And just that gradual move forward is just good stewardship. Yeah. It's possible. It is possible to improve as a preacher, and it takes humility to do so.
So you've got an example of exactly that kind of thing to share with us.
Yeah, so actually you pointed this out earlier, and I think it's a great example, but in the book of Acts, chapter 18, we come across Apollos, okay? And Apollos is described really encouragingly here. Native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus, eloquent, competent in scriptures, instructed in the way of the Lord, fervent in spirit. I mean, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus. That's a lot of positives, right? You're thinking this is good. And then it says, though he only knew the baptism of John. Okay, so there's something missing. Okay, Apollos is ticking a whole load of boxes, and I'm sure we all love to hear Apollos preach. However, there's something missing. And so he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. This is verse 26. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And then he goes on, and they send kind of commendation, encouragement, and help network for him. And I just think that's a great example. Now, here's a guy who is ticking boxes, obviously doing a lot well, but there's a gaping hole in his preaching. He only knows the baptism of John. And so Priscilla and Aquila pull him aside and say, hey, let's chat. And that's what we need. The solution to bad preaching is not picketing. It's not throwing, rotten vegetables at the preacher. It's not, creating a fuss and dividing and trying to get people on your side and being negative and all of the stuff that we so easily fall into. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Draw them aside, graciously help them to see something. Share a book. Hey, you might want to read this. This has really helped me as a Christmas present for you. Sometimes it's as gentle as that, and something that's off is put right, and their ministry, a ministry that is okay but has a problem, becomes a ministry that you can endorse and get behind. And that's what we want. That's what we want to encourage and see and develop. And so who knows, maybe the church you're in, with the preacher you're listening to that you're struggling with, maybe God's put you there to help them. Or maybe the time comes when you need to move on. Both are legitimate options. Either way, let's do it well. Do it graciously, lovingly, clearly, encouragingly, and hopefully the net result, the outcome, will just be more and more good preaching.
Super. So we're grateful for you joining us on another episode of the Biblical Preaching Podcast. Thank you for listening to us and talk about this stuff, and other episodes. We're really grateful, and we will be with you again another time soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.